please pray.
Yeah.
I have your permission to record.
Yeah.
Well, welcome, Donna. Welcome so much. And I'm really glad that you are here live joining me for STORMRIDER, because had no one turned up, I would have been speaking out into the ether, which is just as good. I mean, your intention is always carried through. But it's so lovely that you are here, and I'm grateful for that. So thank you. Okay, so as I'm recording, I'm hoping that all it does is show me. I think that's the way it goes. So if I've done something in error and suddenly there's you and I on the screen, would you have any difficulty with that? Thank you.
None whatsoever.
Yeah, thank you. I know that sometimes that might surprise people if that happened, and I wouldn't want to do that. Okay, so, you know, right off the bat, I know that we've connected in different spaces, and we probably know a little bit about each other, but let me just share a bit more about what it is that I do and why I'm here doing what I do. This is a part of my life that I'm expanding into, and so for me it's always quite experiential. I come from a very different environment. I came from corporate, I came from a business support role, and that's what I'm still doing currently as I transition into what my heart really calls me to do. And I think one of the interesting things is that often we use that as a reason not to do something. And what I've discovered is you can actually do both. And you can be okay with doing both whenever that's what's required. And for me, that's my choice at the moment, is to transition in a way that I'm feeling safe and comfortable and still expanding my healing and learning. But as I'm doing that, I also want to challenge myself. I want to test what it is that my heart says I'm here to do. And this is one of the reasons that I jump on and I offer these sessions. Is there are things that I've learned, things that I know, things that I've remembered, that if there are just a couple of people for whom it's going to resonate, that's what I need to be doing. That's what I need to be doing. And so, you know, this session that I've created is called STORMRIDER because over the last 18 months, that's exactly what I've felt I've been in, a storm. And it hasn't always been a very tumultuous storm. It's happened in moments. Then there are, you know, impacts where it actually feels like a little cyclonic, and then it might ease off. And it wasn't until I started doing the program with Tam last year that I really gained an awareness of the impact of where I was in those storms. And yeah, and so, you know, if you find at any moment, Donna, you want to jump in, please do, because I want this to be quite interactive. But if you're happier to stay on mute, you're more than welcome to. So the idea of STORMRIDER for me is, what is our capacity? What is our capacity to be able to be in any moment where, and my definition of a storm is simply any moment or feeling or circumstance where you find and notice you're holding your breath.
That absolutely makes sense.
And then you notice, you take notice of the fact that you are holding your breath. And if in that moment you get a thought, a belief, or a feeling, and you give yourself pause to question it, that's the benefit of being able to ride the storm. Because storms occur. I mean, that idea of a storm could be a situation, a relationship, a circumstance that you find yourself in, and you hold your breath. And that sense of holding your breath is quite often just a stress response. Well, not quite often, it is a stress response, and it certainly was for me. And it was a behavior and habit that I wasn't aware I was doing. Not consciously. Every so often I would have to either sigh quite heavily, because that sense of holding your breath, you know, it's an automatic nervous system response. You've got to keep breathing to stay alive. And if you're not breathing, your body sort of compels you to take in a breath. But that, for me, it was almost like, you've got to expel what's left and then take in the next breath.
I love that you've explained it that way, because that is exactly what I've been doing.
And it's such a, it's so interesting that you resonate with that, because I think most people, if you brought it to their mind, would say, actually, I think I do that, or they might have a similar pattern that they recognize they do. And for me, it was so unconscious that I just took it on as a way of being, and that's how I continued to go through my day, through my activities. And it tells in very little subtle ways and really big ways as well. You know, holding your energetic body in that pause and not taking in life-giving oxygen and air impacts so many other things. And, you know, in themselves, they take on their own impacts, and on it goes and on it goes. And it wasn't until someone said to me something along the lines of, you sigh a lot. And I thought, first of all, kind of weird for you to be telling me that. Why did you notice? And then I noticed how often I would sigh. And again, without the sense of being self-aware, you just sort of dismiss all that. You sort of park it as, I just noticed I must sigh a lot. There must be a reason. But if you don't pay attention to it, you miss the opportunity of discovering the why, the how come. How come I'm doing that? And I guess that's the idea of being able to ride a storm, is that those moments when those circumstances and feelings and thoughts and beliefs essentially occur, and you find you're holding your breath, and then you notice and question. That is the magic and essence of what it would be to ride a storm. And so storm ride is just the analogy of actually mindfulness. That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because I noticed in the past 6 months that I was sighing a lot, but I became aware of it. You know, how long I'd done it before that, I have no idea. Probably years.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's that idea of being able to hold yourself in a moment to notice without judgment that I think is the value of doing anything and living in a way that's mindful, so full of your mind. And, you know, the breath for me is always the way I can come back to a moment regardless of where I am. You can use very many tools. Some people might use sound, some people might use candles, some people use incense as their anchor for that mindful practice that they might have. For me, I mean, you're breathing everywhere, hopefully. Hopefully you're taking a breath anywhere you are. And it's a perfect way in which you can then bring yourself back to any moment, just be conscious of the breath. And so the very first thing that I think is part of that idea of how do we ride a storm is that capacity to notice, the capacity to be able to say, well, that's curious. I'm suddenly triggered and I feel really pissed off at that. That moment doesn't mean you have to make a judgment about it, but we do. We make it, that's our initial go-to until you come to the habit of suspending judgment, particularly self-judgment. And that level of self-awareness, if you bring in that element of compassion as well as you're noticing, is a huge benefit, because there's nowhere else to go except softly from there. You know, once you can tap into that element of self-compassion and no judgment, you are offered the possibility then to carry on in the most kindest way, you know, and in the most loving and forgiving way. And we forget that our capacity to show that to other people only comes from having experienced it ourselves. You know,
and that's the big thing, isn't it? We can show compassion to other people, but we don't always show it to ourselves because we're not taught to.
Indeed. And it's also, I think culturally, there's a little bit of nuance when people talk about self, and they talk about, you know, sometimes it's conflated with being selfish, and you must be selfless. And I sort of find I sometimes challenge those ideas, because it's, yes, there are elements where if you're only thinking of yourself and not in service to the wider world, your community, that could be viewed as selfish. You know, the idea that you are it and there's nothing beyond you that is of any concern. That element is a kind of being in a selfish way of being. But taking care and being compassionate and loving and being kind and compassionate with yourself and suspending judgment, that's a selfless act of compassion. You know, and for me, really they're just words and nuances, aren't they? It's what do we attach to them that gives it their meaning. And so I like to think that sometimes I am being selfish. You know, if that's the way that people view selfish, is that you are just absorbed with yourself. There are aspects of how I travel in the world that might appear to be selfish to other people, but for me, I take them on as they're essential to keeping myself in a peaceful, calm state.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know? So yes, occasionally when what appears to be selfish is happening, it might be, you know, for lack of a better word, self-care. An odd sort of phrase, but there you go. So, you know, the idea of noticing those moments where we're aware of what we're thinking and what we're feeling, it literally occurs in a moment. And then the next moment passes. But if you catch it in that pause of the moment that you're in, it offers the possibility to be able to say, that is really interesting. Why is it, how come I'm feeling this way about what has just transpired? And acknowledging that, and you know, that sense of being the observer within that moment, I think is the benefit of being mindful in circumstances. And aside from noticing, to observe what's happening is a very subtle difference, because you can notice it because you've brought your awareness to it. But to sit in observation of it means that you almost have to step out of the situation. You know, you're a little bit removed, which is where we are. You know, the human who's having this experience is what is being felt. And you, as the pure essence of consciousness who's observing, is you. You know, and I think, you know, they are so complex and yet so simple ideas that we could talk for half a day on any one of them, and you know, and still never get to the core understanding of it, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And definitely that, you know, not being taught any of that, you know, how to be an observer. You know, it's a skill that we don't grow up with.
Yeah. And there, you know, I think the reason that a lot of things start becoming part of culture, part of society, part of discourse, is that, you know, on a wider level, I think people's consciousness is evolving. You know, this is a time where the world needs a different way of being. You know, Mother Earth needs to be supported in a different way. And we've been given the opportunity and reminders along the way to tap into another way of being and remembering who we are. And living ways in a mindful manner is where we can start, because everyone has the capacity. You know, it's accessible to everyone, and I think that's one of the benefits of bringing yourself into a state of awareness and operating from that, rather than from that. You know, imagine, I don't know what exactly the percentages are, but if I recall, it's something like we operate almost entirely on an automatic fashion for about 90% of our day. You know, which is the habitual things we do. We wake up in the morning, we shower, we brush our teeth, we eat breakfast, we go to work, we leave work, we come home, we cook dinner, we might do a few things, we might watch TV and go to bed and do it all again tomorrow. And for another 5 or 10% of our day, we might be conscious of what it is that we're doing. You know, we took a wrong turn and suddenly we ended up down at the shopping centre instead of at our front door. We noticed that, but on the way, it was all automatically carried out.
Absolutely.
And so what if we tipped the scales and started operating most of our day in a greater capacity to be mindful.
Yeah.
With a greater capacity to be present in the moment that we're presented. Imagine, I think just even subtle changes would make an enormous difference to people's ability to walk through mindfully in life, not just walk through, but to open up possibilities.
Joyfully walk through life.
Yes.
And notice everything.
And notice everything. And can I tell you, only because, sorry, I've just recovered from COVID and I realize I have no tissues at my disposal.
Oh.
And I this morning on my dog walk, one of the things I was just curious at trying out was mindful walking. And so I left my phone at home. I just took a poop bag, as is very essential on a dog walk, and my house keys, and off we went. And what I did was, in between the sort of light poles, I, thinking back to my yoga practice, would keep my head over my heart over my hips, and, tuck in my lower back as I was walking, being careful to align my hips and my knees, and walk intentionally and feeling the footpath move underneath my feet and how my feet adjusted. I walked fairly slower than I might normally, but it was such an incredible difference. Yeah. And a different way of walking, even for 100 meters or so at a time. And they're the little things that we can do in those moments where we might be present to something else, but we want to come back to the moment. Yeah. We might be present because we've just had an argument that occurred 10 minutes ago with someone and we're ruminating on that. Well, it's done, dusted. It's back there. The moment is now. The moment was the dog walk. Yeah, absolutely. And making a conscious choice and taking the action to do that mindfully is, I think, where the work lies. And people think it should come more easily. It's not hard, but it's a practice, and it doesn't necessarily come easily. Yeah. And it's like learning anything, isn't it? Like it's the consistency. Exactly. And it's the consistency to be able to continue with that discipline, because in the end it's going to be worthwhile. Yeah. The discipline you require to be able to get started, but if you don't have consistency, you actually will never finish anything. Yeah. And for me, all of those things become part of those mindful moments when you notice and observe what it is that I'm doing, what I'm feeling, what I'm thinking in that moment. And for me, one of the brilliant things about taking the opportunity to live mindfully is that if you do all that, it doesn't negate, doesn't invalidate what just occurred. All it means is you have given yourself the capacity to notice it. Simply notice it and observe. And that observation is that opportunity in that moment, that brief pause to say, well, how come I do that when? Yeah. And once you disrupt that thought and you're aware of it, what opens up is that window of possibility. That was one of the big shifts for me, was realizing I can be curious. Switch it from that way you just act or react to then going, oh my God, and get curious about That's right. And it's that questioning. I think the idea of, first you've noticed you've held your breath, and then you've noticed you are in a thought pattern, and then you question that thought pattern. Well, all you've done is disrupted it enough that there is an opening in that quantum field of possibilities that says, what if? What if? And I would challenge everybody who says, oh, I can't do that. Other people could do that, but I don't think I could do that, and the reason I can say that is that I would have been one of those people. I was one of those people for most of my life. Yeah, me too. And the idea that I can see it rolling out in a way that dispels that belief. Not just dispels it, but smashes it into the ground and says no more,
yeah,
is the reason why I could say, and I probably wouldn't use the word challenge, it sounds a little bit harsh, but I didn't certainly invite people to consider that they also have the capacity to do it.
yeah.
And I know I can say that with the fullest confidence, because I would never have believed, and never believed, as positive as I imagined my persona was in the world, and as confident as that appeared, I never believed that I had the capacity to be anything beyond that.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah,
you can pretend your way into lots of things, but to sustain that takes a little bit more than pretense.
Yeah.
And I think part of that is your ability to acknowledge, to feel what it is, really feel, acknowledge that, because it is valid.
Yeah.
And the moment you start invalidating it, you've just invalidated yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so starts that circle of guilt and shame, and guilt and shame, and guilt and shame, guilt and shame. And, you know, there's not much love in guilt and shame.
No.
It's not a very loving, kind,
No,
blissful place to be. And so what if you did feel guilt and shame about something? Simply feel it and acknowledge that that's what I feel.
Yeah.
And, you know, the idea of then being able to acknowledge it, I think, is a really healing thing, because it also gives you the authenticity to be able to say, what is occurring for me in this moment is true. You know, I am feeling bitter, I am feeling sadness, I'm feeling angry and frustrated, and I might be feeling envious instead of jealousy. How would I know? You question it.
Exactly.
You know, it feels like jealousy, but actually it's envy, because I'd like that as well.
Yeah.
I'm not jealous that you have it. I would like it. So that's envy, not jealousy. So that capacity to question the nuance of what you're feeling means you really are present. You're present to what is occurring for me in this moment, in this storm that I've just created.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I really wasn't sure how I was going to bring what I'm about to disclose up, because it's one of those things that I was aware of very early in the piece, but I didn't want to admit to myself quite openly. And that is your reality. That is, the storm might be a real storm, but why is it present? Because you created it. There is a part in anything that you are present to that means you have manifested or created it.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm so glad you said that, because I was actually feeling that a few months ago, that is definitely the truth of it. When there's a storm going on around you, regardless of what it's about. Yeah.
Yeah. And I really felt that the deepest part of my healing in all of those suspending judgment and belief about my way of being came from starting to be accountable.
Yeah.
Taking on the acknowledgement that this is how I'm feeling, but how come? And then realizing, actually, that's what I believed about that's not entirely true. There is a part that I'm playing here. Let's have a look at that. And the example that I was going to bring up, only because I want to address that idea of whatever you're sitting in, you've created. It's, you know, there are aspects of people's lives that mean that what looks to be a situation as traumatic, unsafe, painful, abuse, whatever it is, if you said to someone, for example, in my most recent marriage, which is 19 years over, but our domestic environment was not a very happy one towards the end, and there was quite a bit of violence. And what I was present to there was, I'm sitting in this as the victim. It is all happening to me. And yet, as I healed and moved away and moved through all that, what I discovered was, well, what was my part in it?
Yeah.
That was the hardest realization, and it was the most painful one in a lot of ways, because it almost seems as if you're saying, I deserve this. What was happening was something that was deserving to me. And it's not. What it does give you the opportunity to look at is, what was my part in it? It's a dynamic. Nothing happens out of isolation. And so what I recognized for me was what I brought into it was not being able to speak my needs, assuming people would read my mind and naturally jump in and do what I need without me having to tell them. So my capacity to find my voice and express that honestly and openly and candidly was not present at all in much of that marriage. But counter to that was this, not counter, but complementing that was this idea of being a victim. Everything that's happening to me is, oh, you know, it's almost poor me. What can I do about it? I'm in this situation. And so those two very passive aggressive ways of being meant that that was my part in the dynamic. And I can recognize that. I can suspend my judgment and offer compassion and yet not condone the behavior of a partner or the other. And so those things sound like they should not exist in the same space, but they do.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's the complexity of moments where there are dynamics that are occurring, is that all of that can exist at the same time. Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, and so you can imagine that being in a situation where you're not present to somebody else's trauma or pain because you feel like the victim, and you would like them to be able to do this for you, and yet you don't have the capacity to voice that in a way that's respectful and honest and open and loving. And you get two people doing exactly that. Not a good mix.
Not a good mix at all. No.
Not a good mix.
No.
The healing part of that is being able to observe it for what it is. Acknowledge that in those moments, it wasn't right, it wasn't wrong, it wasn't good or bad, it just happened to be what it is. And accepting it. Accepting that that moment was what it is. It's occurred. Nothing you can do to change it.
Yeah. And in some ways, it's made you the person you are now.
Yeah. And, you know, I think the other benefit of being able to acknowledge and accept it is that then you have the choice, what meaning am I going to attach to it?
That is one of the big things I have basically worked on myself in the last 12 months is it's the meaning that you attach to that situation. Because I lived very much in the victim mentality as well. And that was it's like, hang on a minute, you know, when I started to really become aware of it. That you can attach a different meaning to it.
Yeah. And, you know, the most extreme circumstances you can imagine, you know, and I guess what I just want to return very quickly back to the idea of creating your storm, whatever you create, whatever presents to you, you've created. The only thing that I would say there is that that would not be the case for somebody who's experienced child abuse as a child.
Absolutely not.
And for me, I wanted to sort of make mention of that because I think it's a valid exception, because in that circumstance, it is not the child that's created it, it's the adult who hasn't dealt with their trauma and their own pain. And so for me, that's a distinction that's quite important, because you know, it is a part of my experience as well. And so for me to be able to look back and say, okay, so that happened to me, it is not me. And that's the benefit of being a mindful, self-aware adult. But as the child, if you've attached that meaning to the event, you take it on as, I am the bad person. And so, you know, that idea of attaching meaning when you have the reasoning capacity as a mature, aware adult, you can then go back and heal that moment and say, okay, I cannot not have it happened. It happened. whatever the happening was, it happened, accept that.
Yeah.
But it was an event. And I want to share something really beautiful with you. It was a gift from my parents. I used to have these flashbacks, and it was me as a child. It was a sort of a part of our home that I couldn't always remember, but it was sort of in an alcove and a dark sort of space. There was another present human. He was a man, and I felt extremely unsafe and very scared. And it was a recurring, every so often, just this, like a flash of memory. And I never recalled the exact event, but I could go back to the feeling immediately. And I was probably about 32, and I was walking up from my father's home to the mailbox with my mum and dad, and I said to them, was I abused as a child? Like, just out of the blue. This is just a normal day in Sydney. We're going up to the mailbox, and I just asked them this question. And they both said yes.
Wow.
And I thought, wow, first of all, that was a really lovely response, because it was almost like a relieved yes.
Yeah.
And it was palpable, because their sharing of it was just the facts. It was just the facts. And I've always held that as a real gift, because they attached no meaning to it. They simply told me that the person was apprehended, they were charged, they went to jail. So, you know, the real life consequences were all met.
Yep.
And they made nothing more of it. They didn't put any blame or feeling or nuance onto the event that meant I was present in any way as, you know, equally culpable.
Yeah.
And I've
That's a great way. Really great
I'm telling
way.
you, it was, and I've thanked my father quite often for that moment. My mother's been passed for a decade or so, but I thank him quite often for that, and for other moments where he's offered me that perspective of healing, by pointing out that it was just something that happened.
Yeah.
You know, because it wasn't something they were blamed for. It wasn't something I was blamed for. It involved someone else who obviously hadn't dealt with any pain and trauma that they were experiencing. And so that was the circumstance. It just happened. And, you know, it's a really interesting thing to be able to say, how do I feel about that now? And you can only look at it as the observer.
Yeah.
To truly look at every little piece of that event, any event.
Exactly.
You can't do it if you were sitting there as the person for whom it was happening to.
That's so interesting that they could sit in that observer role as well and be so impartial and not attach any emotion to it when it happened to their child.
Yes. And I thought, and at the time, it could have been a very different experience for them.
Absolutely.
We actually never talked about that, but that would be interesting. Actually, I would be curious to ask my dad. His memory is failing him a little, so he may not remember everything, but the idea that those are the things that you can do in a moment, but to get to that, you have to practice doing it in hindsight. And then you can be present in the moment a lot more fully. And I think by that, what I mean is sometimes when something's happening to you, your capacity to be able to recognize it for the moment that it is, in the moment, has to be a practiced thing. It's not going to be something that you get to. Sorry, I'm just gonna close down my video for a brief second because I'm in need of a tissue. Give me just 1 second.
Absolutely.
I had a really mild case of COVID, but I've got this dry cough and runny nose that just, you know, it's almost like a hay fever, and I don't have hay fever, but anyway, I thought it's not running down my nose. Probably not a good look. on a recording. That might not work for
Probably
everybody
not.
else. No. Yes, and so, you know, that idea of practicing something in order to get to a state where it becomes an automatic thing to do.
Yeah.
It requires hindsight in the very beginning. That's been my experience.
Yeah.
And then
yeah.
the more you build that, the more the hindsight is let go of, and you can actually bring yourself into the moment.
Yeah.
And the breath for me is for me the easiest way to get there.
Yeah.
Because it interrupts, it gives you oxygen, it allows you to pause, and you can do it as often as you need to.
Exactly. And
wherever you are.
No one even notices.
No one notices. Exactly. And so I think that was, you know, for me, that particular event was something that I healed in a moment from the gift of having my parents actually tell me the rest of the story.
Yeah.
You know, as much as they thought I needed to know, as much as they could remember. Yeah. And it was just a retelling of the event.
Yeah.
Exactly. Cut and dry.
Yeah.
No emotion. No emotion whatsoever. No.
Which is such a beautiful gift, isn't it?
Oh, so beautiful. You know, because in my mind, I imagine I could have been the one crying, breaking down, offering apologies, you know, moving into a space where I was the victim and feeling all that nonsense. And yet they had this beautiful capacity to be able to say, this is what, then that happened, then this happened, and then they did this, that happened, and he's gone to jail. And that was it.
That's amazing.
You know, and there was obvious love in their retelling. That I felt that.
Yeah.
An enormous relief and love. And afterwards I thought, imagine for 28 years they were waiting for me to ask something.
Yeah, exactly.
And I thought that, I don't know, you know, never once did they raise anything with me. Not once.
Yeah.
Which was an equally beautiful gift, that they allowed me to come to a space, if ever I recalled it, to be able to then, you know, have the conversation about it.
Yeah, yeah. And to, I guess, you know, to never treat you any differently, like not try and wrap you in cotton wool or, you know, like overprotect you, all those things that they could have quite easily done.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And, you know, it's not to say that that tendency was played out in other ways. It could very well have been. I have no awareness of it as an adult, and you know, that could have been, you know, likely what happened. I don't know, but for them to be able to hold all that for 28 years and wait in order that there might be a time that I would like to address it. And it was a beautiful validation, actually, because I thought I was just having, you know, I was making it up, or it was a recurring nightmare, or maybe I heard a story once and I'd taken that on. And, you know, quite difficult sometimes when you've got the child memory and you're trying to fit it together with an adult's awareness. Sometimes pictures don't often look like what they were. And, you know, you said something there that just reminded me of just another sharing that I want to make the point of an event having happened as just an event. And again, it relates to my relationship with my father, and an event that was quite a traumatic event as a family, but it meant, as a young 7-year-old, I was taking care of my younger sibling, and took my eyes off her for a little bit, and she fell into our backyard pool and drowned. Now, what you said that reminded me of that was that sense of not being blamed for something. And over the course of decades, my father and I have had this discussion about that particular event and my part in it, but mostly the blame that I had taken on and the shame and guilt that I'd taken on about that, and hoping that they would just show me how bad I was.
Yes.
in some way, and how guilty I was in some way, and it never happened.
Yeah.
And so if it wasn't happening out there, it was happening in here, because I just wanted to just be guilty, just to feel the guilt and the blame and the consequence of all that.
Yeah.
And in fact, having shared those conversations, one of the very last conversations we had about it, my dad said exactly those words of, that was just something that happened.
Yeah, which is amazing.
It's an amazing, isn't that, the most amazing gift, to be able to be told,
Absolutely.
the loss of your child was just something that happened. And it's one of those moments that stays with me, because it was so impactful and powerful, because it was simple. It was just a few words in a moment where I wanted to know once and for all, do you still love me even though this happened? That's really what I was asking.
Yes.
And I was asking as a almost 50-year-old, I can tell you.
Yeah.
And his response was exactly that. That was just something that happened. And I know that would have been his response each of the other times that I've wanted to have him tell me not to be guilty about it anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And for him to share just once more exactly the same words, I'd finally come to a capacity to realize, oh, that's not my guilt to feel. It's not my guilt to feel.
Yeah, the interesting thing that I've noticed as I've gotten older, and particularly once I hit my 50s, but more so once I reached the end of my 50s, headed to my 60s, was like, you just can't stuff these things down anymore. You cannot pretend things, you don't feel things that you don't, you just get to the point where you don't want to carry anything like that forward any longer, and that's one of the big catalysts for me that's been in the last, decade, is that I don't want that lens. I want to shift that lens to a different perception.
Yeah. And that's, the idea of sitting in a storm, if it's a circumstance, and allowing yourself to notice what it is and observing that, and then feeling and acknowledging, accepting. What do you do with the acceptance then? You've accepted that it's happened. You just surrender it.
And that was the biggest lesson I learned in 2020, right towards the end of 2020. Up until then, I kept saying, yes, but how do you surrender? How do you surrender? And I woke up one morning and I just knew. It just happened.
It's a point you get to, but it can also be a choice.
Exactly. And I had been making, and I think that was it. I had made my intention that I wanted to know how to surrender. Teach me, how do I surrender? And I just woke up one morning and
you
went,
say,
this is it.
Yes.
Oh my God.
What if all it took?
Feels.
That's right. And what you imagine, sorry, that's my dog letting me know someone's on the driveway.
Oh.
She's the best alarm ever.
Yeah.
My doorbell, my security system, the whole kit and caboodle.
Yeah.
That idea of being able to just even articulate, I surrender.
Yeah.
Because once you've given it word, the word becomes matter.
Yeah.
The thought becomes matter. It becomes a thing, and you're able to then do something with that.
Yeah.
And that idea of acceptance, I think, is an element of behaving that requires self-compassion.
It is.
To do it in a way that you don't attach. You can accept something and still feel guilty and shame over it. Guilt and shame.
Absolutely.
That's quite easily done.
Yeah.
To accept it and surrender it, you need to shower it. You need to infuse it with self-compassion.
Exactly.
Otherwise, it's got nowhere else to go but back inside again. And the benefit of sharing this with other people, I think, is that, so many times we hear the same idea, we might hear the same piece of wisdom, And it only takes one other person to say exactly the same thing, probably in a slightly different way, or the nuance might be different, and then it's suddenly remembered by us.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not that we never knew it.
No, that was my experience, was that all of a sudden I remembered how to surrender, and I remembered unconditional love for myself.
Yes. And it's an interesting place to be, because often we can extend that to somebody else, but is it a full-hearted extension of compassion if you're not experiencing it as the self? I often feel it's almost a half-hearted attempt. You're doing it because, well, I was doing it because I felt like that's what society and culture and, you know, being a good human is about. You show compassion to people. And the moments that I show myself compassion, I find that there's a deepening in the compassion you show other people.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, it's a natural extension of that self-compassion.
Yeah.
When you know what it feels like, you're able then.
It's definitely a deeper truth, isn't it? Like when you start to feel that within yourself, and then you extend it to somebody else, there's a genuineness.
Exactly.
Yes.
It's an authentic way of showing compassion to somebody that is palpable. You feel it. It is not something that you have to contrive. And I really don't get the sense that unless you do that for yourself, that you truly have 100% intention to show compassion to other people. You're part of the way there, because you're trying to be a good human, and this person needs a bit of love and support and perhaps some empathy as well. But your capacity to be able to be in that space with them in true compassion requires you to know what that feels like. And
that definitely something has to be practiced.
Absolutely. And I think that's the great thing about being mindful and being self-aware, is that you realize it's one thing to be able to have the gift of remembering, and you just realize this is what I need to be doing. It's quite the other thing to keep choosing to do it, and it is a choice. And it's not just a choice, it's a choice that you continue making. It's not a one-off. That sort of feels satisfying for a moment, and then if you don't keep doing it, then you'll quickly forget what it feels like. But the moment you start practicing it consistently, it becomes such an automatic part, a new way of being. You know, you've added on another layer to how you operate, that's the way you'll carry forward in the world. That's the way you will show up. That's the way you'll present. That's the way people will feel you. And
absolutely.
It's not a very easy or genuine place to come from unless you've experienced that for yourself, and you've done those mindful practices of noticing and observing and feeling and acknowledging and accepting and surrendering. You know, and that point when you get to, you know, actually giving it all up, I think that's when you blow open that window of possibility. You know, I mean, probably each of those moments where you've noticed something and you're observing and you're acknowledging, you're sort of cracking open the window a little. But I think,
and then
once you surrender, or you've got to shove something in there to keep it open. Pry it open for a little bit longer. But the moment you accept and surrender something, I think you blow that baby right open, and then you can create a new possibility.
And that's when you're faced, aren't you, with all this other thing, all the other things that you sort of look at and you go, oh my God, do I actually feel that way? Is that the truth?
Yes.
And then I guess basically keeping yourself in that space, or, you know, being in that awareness of making a choice, and you know, knowing that you can choose, because you know, we're not taught that either. So we go back into that mindless
automatic behavior. And that idea of choice, again, it's not when I say it's not a one-off, it's not a one-time only thing, it's a continual thing.
It is a continual thing.
there will always be a one or
Mm.
the other.
Mm.
And so in those moments, even in those mindful moments, you're making a choice.
Mm.
I know what it's like to choose this, and that no longer serves me, so I will choose this.
And
Still
that's
a choice.
it's really a powerful place to be, to know,
Yeah.
remember what it felt like
Yeah.
to choose that way,
Mm-hmm.
or, automatically choose that way.
Yeah.
And go, I don't want that.
Yeah.
And yes, we're all human and we slide back into that quite easily,
Yes.
unfortunately. But just having that knowing and that remembrance that we do have that choice. And even if we sit in this automatic space, it might be a day. It might be a few days. But if we then become aware, we can pull ourselves back and go,
that's
hang on,
it.
that's that chase.
That's exactly right. And choice is a really important part of accountability, I think, too, because it comes back to that sense of for me, sitting in victimhood for a great deal of my time, only because I just never felt I could use my voice to say exactly what I needed. And so it's the acceptance of whatever came to me would be a source of resentment. And so finding your voice and being able to be accountable for that means that you recognize what the choice is. You can recognize, okay, I chose something. Well, that was a bit of a poor choice, actually. And I don't think I want to choose that any longer. And surrendering that to be able to create another possibility, I think, is so magical, because it requires nothing more than your mindful presence. Truly does not require more. Not money, a little bit of energy, presence of mind, intention, action, and creation. But we can all do that.
And isn't it interesting that when it comes down to that simplicity, that we don't trust simplicity?
Well, that's just another excuse. Let's find another excuse then.
Exactly. We go looking for the hard way of doing things.
Yes, and I think the beauty of recognizing that life is complex. As complex as it is as simple as it is as well. That's that duality.
It is.
They can coexist, and they do coexist, because if you believe in the field of energy just being a quantum, all possibility existing all at once, that means contradictory things will exist in the same space at the same time. And so for me to come to that understanding, it's just a natural part of the next step for me to look at life, is actually, what is the possibility that I want to create now? And the idea for me, one of the big things for this year is abundance, and it's not accumulation of abundance, it's recognizing abundance. It's the recognition of abundance, where it's present always, all the time, ever present. And I would find at the end of a financial year getting quite excited at the idea of a tax return. Just happened to be, they were generous for decades, and I would take an extravagant holiday here and have an experience there in order to meet what that idea of abundance was to me. But there was never any peace and calm in that experience. And what I discovered was you cannot operate towards abundance from a belief of lack.
Absolutely.
And so recognizing that pattern was one side, and then recognizing other parts of that pattern. For example, getting to the end of a new year and into a coming year, I would always tap out a loan or tap out my mortgage, because it was a sense of then going into the new year from abundance. But still with a lack of belief. And
absolutely.
These things will always, there's this tension between them, always working together, and it appears that they're working in favor of you, and then you realize, how come it's swinging the other way? What's happening now? And striking a balance with those two opposing things. Neither of them are in alignment.
No.
And so, you know, for me, one of the biggest learnings and pieces of healing is to come to a place where I recognize the abundance in everything.
Yeah.
And particularly the abundance of money as energy.
Yeah. And that's such a big thing. Like,
it's huge.
It's really, when you said that about, you know, your intention for this year is to recognize abundance, I was like, that just resonated right through my body, because I've had the same, very similar issues, particularly with money. You know, it's always, so there's that lack mentality when it comes to money, but not seeing the abundance that's everywhere, the abundance in nature, you know, just everything.
And it's always, and you know, when you recognize that your needs are always met.
Absolutely.
That is a miracle in recognizing abundance all around. And, you know, for me, being able to look at creating a possibility means holding the belief that in the quantum field of energy, if all things are possible and they all exist all at the same time, the possibility I want already exists.
Yeah, exactly.
It already exists. And, you know, the power of recognizing coming out of a storm because you've done all the work to be able to move through it in a sense of peace and calm means you then have the creative capacity to say, what possibility do I want now?
Yeah.
How am I going to create that possibility? And what if? And what would it feel like?
Yeah. And it's that feeling, isn't it? Because if you haven't really experienced it, that feeling, then you don't know. Because if you've only experienced it with the lack mentality.
Yes. And I think that's the power of exploring what it is to create a feeling and allow your mind to take that on as a way of being. And then that experience, once you've created it, actually will present itself to you. You don't need to know how it's coming. And I think that's the danger, is you want to then know.
Exactly. I was just going to say that is the pitfall, isn't it?
Don't put a date on it. Don't put what it will look like. No.
Yeah.
And
don't attach a scenario to
that's
it.
right. It's not the how that is going to happen, is what will it feel like. And it's an exciting thing to start practicing, I think, for me in particular, because I feel it's the next level after you've come out of a practice of mindfulness, is to be aware that, you know, the creation of that circumstance and that creation of the situation and the feeling and the thought and the belief that you were operating from were entirely created. Entirely created. And so what if you had the possibility of creating something else? What would that look like? You know, and I'm excited at the moment. I'm actually reading a book, Dr. Joe Dispenza's, I don't know where I put it.
Is that being supernatural? Is that the being?
No, his first book was Evolving Your Mind or Expanding Your Mind, something like that. But this is, let me just go and get it. I'll put it up.
Yep. Oh, yeah, I know. Yeah.
Probably a bit difficult. It's called Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. And a friend had recommended it to me. Actually, my Reiki master had recommended it to me in one of our very loving and long conversations. And I sort of, I like to just listen to him. I don't really want to read books right at the moment. And yet I haven't been able to, it was a Christmas gift, and I haven't been able to put it down. About 2/3 of the way through it.
It's interesting how books come to us when it really is the right time.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, I had the same thing last March. I had been recommended to read The Surrender Experiment so many times, and I hadn't read it.
I don't know that. Who's that?
I've forgotten his name.
Surrender Experiment. Yeah.
And March last year, around my birthday, I got a voucher from a bookstore, and I walked in and I was looking at the books going, maybe that, maybe, you know, deck of cards. And this book literally fell off the shelf at me. And it was the surrender experiment. And I went, okay, point taken.
Yes.
And I could not put it down.
That's marvelous.
You know, and I just felt every level of surrender as I read it.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
And you know, it goes back, I guess, to that, for me, I mean, I hear it paraphrased in lots of different ways, but the idea that whatever's for you will come to you.
Yeah.
And I really, it's such a simple statement, and I feel it's so true. And that it's that idea also that level of acceptance and acknowledging something, if you hold that, everything that's for you will come to you. It will not pass you by. What is for you will not pass you by. You then need to believe that it's created.
Yeah.
And that it's for you. But what if it presents and it's really traumatic and it appears to be bad or wrong? You know, it's again, for me, back to that duality of things. And it is just an opportunity then to say, well, what is my part in this? It may appear to be traumatic. It may appear to be bad, so-called circumstance, or a stressful environment, whatever it is. If you believe that nothing for you, if it's for you, it will not pass you by.
Yeah.
What an opportunity then to say in that moment, what was my part in this? Because, you know, I think that's the unfolding of the human experience, is that we come in perfect and whole and remain perfect and whole, and we return remembering exactly who we are. And for me, I think that's the essence of unfolding as a human being, is that you are just on a remembering journey.
Yeah. Yeah.
To remember who you truly are.
Yeah.
And it might come in all sorts of forms, and it will come in the form that it's most perfect for you in every moment that you're in.
Yeah.
And so,
and if it takes one of those events that feel traumatic to awaken that remembering, then that's why
it's presented. And you know, the beauty, I think, in healing those moments and to heal the remembering, and I think it comes with it's a sense of gratitude as well, to have been presented this possibility to remember and to heal.
Yeah.
Is to say, well, what was my part? Why is this presenting to me?
Yeah.
What is in this for me, and what is my part in it? And you know, I think that's the power of those very simple statements. And the awareness and the practice and consistency to do it, is that every moment that presents, you will have the opportunity to say, well, how come?
Yeah.
What is in this for me, and what is my part in it?
Yeah.
And you can't get away with that. If you want to be accountable, you can't get away with not doing that.
Yeah, it's definitely the consistency, isn't it? And as you said, that's where hindsight comes in, because
well, that's right. You get to recognize, and you go, okay, that's what that was.
Yeah.
And for me, I think the other beautiful part of mindfulness is that, what if you got to a point where you could recognize that in the moment? You didn't have to wait for 3 decades to get to the hindsight moment and go, now I know why.
Yeah.
You know, that presence of mind that you can bring to something in a moment and recognize it there. Done, dusted.
Yeah.
Next, please.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, and I think if you brought in that sense of gratitude about every circumstance, every moment, you would see the good in it. You would see the miracle. You would see the possibility.
Yeah.
You know, it would be difficult not to, because you've taken it on from that level of observing what is happening.
Yeah.
You know, with a sense of gratitude and acceptance and surrendering. and opening up that actual space to be able to create something. I think you could do all the rest of it beforehand, but if you miss the opportunity then to take on another possibility, you probably find you have to do it all again in the next storm, and that's fine if that's what needs to happen.
Well, absolutely. I guess, so, if you have to experience that 2 or 3 times,
yes,
then
exactly,
that is, again, the perfect way it's meant to be. But
yes, and you're also building up some consistency and building that muscle to be able to say, let's pause, let's take a breath. How come? And
that's a
interrupt that
really
moment.
good point. Like that, it's just shifted something in my perspective, which is great, because knowing that if you experience a few times and then you can it's building up that consistency, that muscle, to then say, well,
okay, I recognize something is happening here. And if it's happened a few more times, maybe it's me.
Exactly.
Maybe I'm doing something in this part of whatever that circumstance was.
Yeah.
And what a brilliant opportunity.
Exactly.
And that sense of curiosity, I think, is a vital part of any learning experience, because you watch children. If you watch children at play and in learning, and when they're learning, they're playing, and when they're playing, they're learning, that's the beauty of, play. You watch their sense of curiosity. It's infectious.
It is.
It's infectious. And I love that if you retain that, or if you tap into it again as an adult, and it could be play in art, it could be play in music, it could play in nature, play in sound, play in anything where our creative capacities are enhanced, is play. I mean, I think that's essentially what we are, creative beings anyway. Everything we create is a creation, so hence we are creative beings. I think that's one of the natural states of being human, is we are creative beings.
Yeah, exactly.
And people say, oh, I can't sing, or I like to sing but I don't have a voice. I think, well, no, you're creating, and you're creating something with voice, and everybody can sing. We don't all sing the same tune or the same sounds, but we can all sing. And we can all paint. It doesn't look the same as somebody else's painting, but we can all paint. And that possibility to create something that is a natural extension of having noticed something else is a miracle. It really is a miracle. And it's those small moments when they occur, and then you recognize it, that if you also then recognize how grateful for that moment you are, you're building that self-compassion, you're building that sense of gratitude and experiencing true joy in something. All those high vibration states that we feel when we're in them, and we most people want to attain them, whether they call them those things or not. Everyone wants to imagine that sense of bliss and that sense of joy. You might call it love, you might call it something else, because that's what you recognize, but those really high vibration states of being are created. Their sense of creations and their feelings of creations, and we can create them in a moment. And if you can't feel it in the moment, imagine what it will feel like. How would it feel? Oh, let me give it some. Okay. It might feel like lying down on a bare rock at North Maroubra with the sun on my back. Like that for me is a blissful moment, and I can tap into it. I know exactly what it feels like because I did it for years, and it's beautiful and blissful, and I feel it in my bones, and I feel it right to the very extremities of my fingers and toes. If I can feel that, I've just recreated that exact same feeling all over again. And you just moving that into a possibility of something else is exactly the same process. Creating and having that experience, and your body saying, oh, that's what it feels like, and your mind remembering, and then aligning those two. And that's the point of absolute creation.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, the idea that you physically can create a feeling.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
the mind believes it, and then the body remembers it, and you can tap into it again and again and again.
And that's the beautiful, I mean, it's such a great way of explaining it, you know, that your mind and your body then come together.
Mm-hmm. It has to be aligned. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, it has to be aligned, because I think that's the part of, you know, the powerful part of our mind is that it has the capacity to tap into different parts of the same structure. And yet it's our body that is driving a lot of that as well.
Exactly.
And imagine what power there would be if they were both operating in alignment. You know, if the feeling that you're creating and experiencing in your body becomes a thought in your mind, and you can have them both all occurring in a moment together, like I reckon that's the capacity of true joy.
Yeah.
You know, that's, you know, the highest vibration is joy.
Yeah.
And if you can imagine that what it would take would be your mind and your body operating in alignment, if that you equate that to joy, and you could experience that feeling and tap into it all the time. Oh, I'm kind of getting all fluttery just thinking about it. I mean, for me, that, you know, that in itself takes mindful practice.
Yeah.
It is not it is not a fly-by-night thing. It is not a one-off thing. You can create it one-off, but if you want to experience it consistently and as a way of being, it requires choice. It requires observation. It requires acknowledgement and acceptance and surrender.
Yeah.
And the act of intention and creation. Now, all of those are prerequisites. One of those things is missing, you don't get the complete experience.
Yeah, exactly.
Or the benefit, I imagine.
Yeah, yeah. Like that really is the puzzle, isn't it?
I think so, yeah. I think so.
Pieces.
Yes, and they're all pieces. And, you know, we can do a little bit of them really well as we're building those muscles. You know, that sense of noticing might come more easily because that's where you started, and you can keep doing it. And then you start being able to observe it, truly observing it.
Yeah.
When you step out of the picture, and then you're able to acknowledge what that feeling is, really getting into it. Am I angry? No, I feel hurt. It might feel as though I'm angry, but what it is that I'm hurt. I'm pained by something, and I'm exhibiting anger because I'm feeling the pain. And so really breaking down that feeling takes an observation of what is happening. And I believe that those are the things that we deserve to practice. We deserve, if we want to keep them as part of our lives.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to evolve and enhance and be able to share them with people, is that we consistently practice.
Yeah. And one of the big things I noticed for me when I started to question what that feeling was that I didn't always have the words for it, but I went looking online for, you know, the lists of emotions or feelings. And I, you know, that helped so much, because it was like I could look down and go, oh my God, that's actually what it is. It's not, you know, it's not bitterness, or it's hurt. Or So it's just.
And actually, Brene Brown has a beautiful book. I think it's called Map of the Human Heart, or Map of the Heart.
Yep.
And you know, as part of her work, this was a sort of glossary of emotions, actually, is what it was. And it was one of the first times I'd heard this distinction between envy and jealousy.
Yeah, right.
And so, you know, we can start calling it one thing, but what we're really referring to is, it's not that I don't want you to have it, is that I also want to have it, which is what envy is, as opposed to jealousy. I don't want you to have that.
Yes.
And so even that subtlety of semantic and nuance, being able to give yourself the space to recognize it, it means that you're giving yourself presence. You're giving yourself a mindful moment. You're saying, okay, it's actually that what I'm feeling like is that it's not that I don't want you to have it. It's that I would like to also have it.
Yeah.
And envy, when I use envy, people often think I'm jealous of something that they have, meaning I don't want you to have it. No, I'm saying I love so much what you've got. I would love to have that.
Yeah.
And so I make a point, if I feel that that's that distinction, is I will use the word envy, and people, you know, will often, I can tell by the look, because they get a bit quizzical, and then if I explain it to them, they go, oh, okay, I didn't realize there was a difference.
Yeah.
And so again, the sharing of that means that I've been able to give somebody else an experience and bring to their perspective or awareness or whatever another way of looking at something, or a deeper way of thinking about their own feelings.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and I think the culmination of putting all those things together is that you can actually find yourself in any storm.
Yeah, exactly.
Literally any storm. And the storm might be that you woke up and you forgot that something was due today and you haven't worked on it, and it's starting to give you a moment of panic. Well, did you create that circumstance? Probably.
Yeah.
Because you knew you had to work on it 3 weeks ago, but you didn't do anything about it.
Yeah.
And you find yourself now at that 11th hour. So whatever it is, and then taking that on to say, okay, yeah, that could have gone differently, but I chose to do something else with that. And this is now where I'm at. What if? And move on from there. Instead of what probably would have been my go-to is just tuck myself up in bed for a week and just sit in a state of chronic depression over it for a little bit longer.
Yes.
You know, which for me were ways of operating for decades. And I still feel the moments when I can feel the darkness.
Yeah.
And then I know I need to shed a bit more light, or I know I need to go and take some rest from whatever is happening.
Yeah.
Actually, you're probably familiar with the actor Jim Carrey.
Yeah.
One of the things I really love about him is that he's so open, and he shares so vulnerably about his own experiences with chronic depression. And he does it in a way that he offers himself no excuses. He just tells you exactly what the experience was and what it's meant to him. And he referred to depression as deep rest. Yep. And I loved that, because that was always my sense when I would sit.
Yeah, that's amazing.
In chronic depression, it was a space where I could retreat in safety, to be able to then come to a place where I could deal with something, because I had to find the capacity, then make a choice to use that capacity. And I felt at the time I required deep rest in order to do it. Yeah. Because, you know, I guess chronic stress, all those things that build up, you need a space to be able to retreat. What if you could create that space anyway as a mindful practice?
Exactly. And not put any judgment on yourself for doing it.
Hello.
Hold yourself in compassion.
Yes. And so, you know, that idea of finding another way of having the same sense of deep rest is a gift from those moments of chronic depression.
Yes.
And some of it is chemically based. I don't, that it is not my professional credential to be able to talk to it, but I know from my experience that there's an element that is present in a lot of our familial line, and perhaps that was a part of it. But the other part was I made a choice to go and sit quietly for weeks and decades. In moments where I needed to remember the capacity to be able to do something. And now what I recognize, and what I'm so grateful for, is that when I feel that darkness, and it is a sense of feeling, I can feel the overwhelming sense, and then I recognize it, because I've called it what it was before. I know what it looks like. And I no longer say, I want to hide from you. I say, I see you. Yes. I see you now. I'm not going to follow you though. I'm not going in there again. And then make the choice to either take myself down to the beach, or go for another walk with my dog, or go and sit outside, or ground myself. Another sense of connection, bringing a moment of safety and security in another way that connects me to something rather than disconnects me.
Yeah.
And so that's not a capacity I would have had if I wasn't mindful of it at all.
Yeah. And that brings up a very good, valid point, and I guess puts into context for me now that I've let myself explore art. Art is my release.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah.
Instead of going into that dark place and using, you know, that as a hiding place, it's now my release.
That's perfect, because that's a gift.
It is. It's
a real gift. It's a real gift. And I've seen your work when you post your watercolors online, and, you know, it is one of those things that I think as a creative, we do have ways of being able to express those moments of darkness with light, with love, with our capacity to share and have a meaningful exchange with that darkness. You know, to be able to release it and say, this is what you look like to me now. Beautiful.
You know, and it has been a journey, like you. It's been decades of, you know, sitting in that darkness and I guess, you know, not embracing the light in that darkness, you know, bringing it together and going, no, this is what
I'm only choosing this part. I only want to see the dark part.
That's it. You know,
I don't want to see the light.
And running away from that light.
Yes.
You know,
one of the things, you know, when people say, oh, what do you do? Like, you know, I don't know why they ask that silly question. What do you do?
I don't either, you know.
But I guess people want to know, what identity are you carrying right at this moment? What do you want to share with me? So one of the things I do tell people is that, you know, what I am is a light bearer, and I share my light with those who are still remembering theirs. That's a gift that I have. That's a gift that I have the capacity now to be able to bring to people, and I do it in my daily life, in the stranger that I meet at the corner, at the bus stop, and I can feel that there is a need for them to reach out, and I'm open to that for them. I'm not sure that
say you do it in your corporate world.
I do. Well, you know, I do it in my daily interactions. I want to do it in a different way that's more balanced and more authentic and aligned to me. But I don't believe I would have had the capacity to do it nearly as well if I didn't remember all the moments that came through the journey, all the moments that brought me to those realizations and those rememberings. Because I think that enhances your capacity then to show somebody that you recognize that in them as well. Because that's a feeling, like that's a feeling that people will naturally tap into when you're in interaction with them. You know, your words can disguise lots of things, but the way you're making someone feel in a moment is, you can't disguise that. And so, you know, I think that that's the benefit of every experience you have, is that if you believe that it's for you because it hasn't passed you by, then what are you going to glean from it? Maybe it's the darkness that you need to glean. You know, maybe the fact that to get to the light, you've got to go through the darkness anyway. So what a gift to recognize that. You know, and the darkness is not the same for everybody. Some people's darkness is pretty pitch black, but within that, there's beauty and there's light and there's love, and it's just, you just don't see it yet. It's still there, it's still present, it's still a possibility that exists. You just haven't seen it yet. And, you know, being able to ride out any storm mindfully means that you then get to a point, it's an inevitable outcome. It is an inevitable outcome that if you go right through to the darkest, most cavernous part of that, you get to the end and there's the light. It was there all the time, you just didn't see it. It's literally there all the time. You know, and
it's interesting that's, I mean, you know, I love the way you've described that, because that's exactly what it is. anyone
Yes.
that's been in that dark
Yes.
space.
Yes, any dark space.
Yeah.
You know, it could be whatever addiction you have. That's a dark space sometimes.
Absolutely.
And so, you know, does it mean that there was nothing else present? No.
No.
It was
just means
present
that's what
all the
you
time.
Yeah.
All
You
of
just
it is
focused
present.
on one point, one speck of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And mindfulness, being able to recognize those moments of, you know, storms in your life, and being able to then expand it so that you can blow open that window of possibility and create something else, is the light at the end of the tunnel.
It is.
And it's a gift that's always been present for us. And I think that's, you know, to be reminded that it's our capacity,
Yeah.
and our divine right to be able to recognize the light within every moment. You know, kind of makes me realize how powerful we really are.
Yeah.
You know, we're not a diminished essence at all.
No.
And when we diminish ourselves, we diminish the divine. So maybe a bit less of that. I think I want to diminish the divine a lot less in my life. And you know, what a beautiful way to start, by doing that for yourself.
Yeah.
Where all good things start, with yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
this has been such a beautiful time, and I'm so glad that you jumped on. I truly would have recorded it. I've done that before, where I've had a session and people have said I'm coming and no one turned up, but I recorded anyway and send it to people.
Yeah.
Because my intention was to show up anyway, and so why not just do that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, but to have the interaction of another energy there is always so beautiful, because it makes the experience for everybody else a different experience.
Yeah.
You know, while ever I might have been able to share much the same message, our interaction means that it brings a level of emotion and love to something that's different. You can't create this as one person.
No, you have to, and it is that interaction, isn't it?
Yes, that's right.
You know, somebody else brings something slightly different to it, which can then take you off into different areas that you might have touched on.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
And it changes the dynamic, and I'm grateful for that. So I'm so thankful that you were here, and I guess when others hear it too, they will be equally. I imagine that I send gratitude to them to be able to recognize what a moment it was that we shared, when they listen and hear perhaps a different thing for them, but it will have changed for them the fact that we were here together. So I thank you.
You're welcome. And I really enjoyed it. And, you know, in my mind, because I'm in Queensland, it was like 10:30 in my mind, where it's 10:30 for you.
Yes, that's right.
And I opened up my phone to see if I'd had any messages or anything. And I was like, there's an email there. And when I looked at it, I went, oh, it's 9:30. And that was at 9:15. So
how beautiful.
Perfect timing.
That's perfect. Well, see?
It is exactly meant to be.
Well, that's right. What is for you won't pass you by, Donna. Won't pass you by at all.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for giving me your time and your energy, and enhancing this experience for me, because it truly was a lovely sharing, and I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, and you definitely enhanced it for me, because I had little subtle things that I needed to be reminded of.
Yeah, and I think that's the beauty of sharing, is that it's not often that we don't know, it's just that we forgot, or we just need to remember. And that helps that pattern of consistency as well, when we keep hearing things. So, you know, I mean, this was a perfect happening. It's all perfect anyway. It's all perfect anyway. Imperfectly perfect.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'll stop the recording and say goodbye, but I'll stay on for just a moment afterwards and just have a quick personal goodbye. But for anyone else who's listening, I'm just going to put through very quickly now the bonuses that Donna has the advantage of taking up, and that is, I wanted to offer a personal guided meditation. So what I would invite you to do is tell me a situation or circumstance that's on your heart at the moment, and I would provide a 10-minute guided meditation just for that and just for you personally. So that's an offer for you, but there's also an offer if you want to work with me through the year. I've got a couple of bonuses that I wanted to put out. So what I'll do is I'll include them in the email that I send to folks. And, you know, it's my high and my low end of the programs that I'm running this year. So it'll be there, a little bit of something for everybody. But I'll put the details in the email that I send out with the recording. So, but so if you send me your email with whatever it is that's on your heart at the moment, and I will, within the week, I will provide you with a personal guided meditation.
That's great.
Yes,
I really love that idea.
I think it's a great idea because it means that we all get the benefit for something that is present for us personally. So there you go. That's the bonus.
All right. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. So I'll stop the recording, and thank you to everyone who watches it as well. Take care.